I'll look for one.
Better give one to Peroni. He's an ex-iron worker.
I know. Well, actually, the guy at
Let
the
you know
Iron
that.
Workers called Peroni
Oh,
and
did
said,
he?
what radio station should I advertise on in Monroe? And he goes,
10 seconds.
there's only one. I'll find you one. I have several bags.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Business and More. I'm your host, Greg Moore. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us on Facebook and on Monroe County Radio, on YouTube, and all around the world. We appreciate it. We have a special guest in studio today. I'm excited to have him here. Just a wealth of institutional knowledge, business knowledge, entrepreneurship, all the stuff we talk about. We have President and CEO of Monroe Bank and Trust, soon to be, or possibly we can get into that, First Merchants Bank here in Monroe, Doug Chaffin. Doug, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Greg.
Thanks. And I just wanted to open up a little bit, let the people know a little bit about you, maybe your bio, where you come from, maybe your business history. Give us a couple minutes on that and introduce yourself to the folks listening.
Sure. Well, my wife Diane and I came to Monroe in 2001, and in 2004 I became president and CEO of Monroe Bank and Trust. Prior to that, I worked for Huntington Bank and I worked for First Michigan Bank in Northwest Michigan. And my career really has been running community banks in Indiana and Ohio through multi-bank holding companies, more recently through Monroe Bank and Trust for the last, 18 years.
Okay. What were you doing before that? Before the 2001?
For 2001, I was working for Huntington Bank on
Okay.
the west side of the state. I ran the commercial group for Huntington along the West Michigan Lake Shore, along the Lake Michigan Lake Shore. And I had a territory that was as far south of Dowagiac, Michigan, and as far north as Sault Ste. Marie.
That's a little bit of driving.
It was a little bit of driving. It was 300 miles from
Okay.
point, and I was glad to come back to Monroe.
So how many years in the banking industry altogether? would
About
you say?
40 years altogether.
Okay,
Yeah.
so pretty much that's what you've been doing
Right.
your entire professional life.
Absolutely.
And what interested you in that?
Well, my father was a banker. My grandfather was a banker. I went to business school at Indiana University, and I really hadn't decided what type of business I was going into until my sophomore year in college, and I had an internship with the FDIC, and I was stationed in Madison, Wisconsin, believe it or
Okay.
not, which was a great place to be when you're 19 years old.
Sure.
And had a great exposure to community banking in particular, and so that's really where I decided to go.
What was your favorite parts of that experience in banking? What are some of those things that you just absolutely love?
You know,
I always love asking that to people who've been in an industry for a while because there's got to be some things you love to stick with them.
What I loved about it was I grew up in a small town.
Okay.
Ellisville, Indiana is 7 miles from Bloomington, and maybe 1,000 people. And I really liked that small town atmosphere. I really liked the fact that the local banker was a big part of the community, a big part of the economy, a big part of just the fabric of the community.
Okay, so you come to Monroe, 2001. In 2004, you're CEO of Monroe Bank and Trust. Can you tell me a little bit about how that transition came into place, being
Right.
kind of relatively new to the community, 4
Right.
years, and then running what I consider to be the best bank in Monroe County? And I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here.
Well,
I
Ron
banked there.
LeBeau, who many people know, was
Yep.
my predecessor. He was president and more recently chairman of Monroe Bank and Trust.
Mhm.
And I think when Ron was appointed as CEO by the board of directors, his first priority was to find his successor. So he spent
Okay.
2 or 3 years running the bank and also searching for someone who could come and succeed him as president and CEO. So when he hired me in 2001, it was really with that intent. So I was executive vice president and chief lending manager for
Okay.
3 years until I was appointed president and CEO. And Ron
So,
retired.
so you were specifically brought here by
For
the
that purpose.
organization
Yep.
here in 2001.
Right,
Yeah.
for that purpose.
And what was the size of the company at that time? Just for people listening, I have people that listen that have 2 employees, and
Right.
we have some people listen who have 250 employees. So, quite the range. So, what kind of, just for people who might not be familiar with Monroe Bank and Trust,
Sure.
what size business was it when when you were involved in it, or still are?
Yeah, we were about $1 billion in assets at that time.
Okay.
And we grew to about $1.6 billion.
Okay.
But we shrunk back to about $1 billion during the financial crisis, and
Sure.
today we're about $1.3 billion.
And how many employees does Monroe Bank and Trust employ?
280 employees.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're talking medium to large business.
Absolutely.
So you take over there. I want to get into this, and we have time to do it as well, because this is probably the most interesting to me, is how you manage a group of people, how you lead a group of people. I think it's something that's maybe sorely missing in some of the young guys that I work with, young guys and gals that are either business owners or influences in their business. The process of communication, leading, all those things. So you have a company that's a couple hundred people. Obviously, you can't touch every single person, and see that you obviously leave that up to some of your managers and leaders within the organization. But I'm wondering, what were some of maybe the challenges for you when you took over, and then maybe some of the good things, some of the positives that maybe changes you made or you saw that Monroe Bank and Trust was currently doing and you expanded on? Maybe touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, maybe we just talk about leadership a little bit.
Okay.
And as I became among leadership in banking, whether it was a smaller bank or a smaller team, it was usually 10, 20, 30 people. And in that environment, it's much easier to lead by example, I think.
Sure.
And you've got day-to-day contact typically with just about everyone, and so it's a little different environment. When I came to Monroe, the challenge really was exactly what you mentioned. How do you motivate? How do you operate? How do you encourage? How do you lead a group of 300 people roughly? And it took a while to figure that out, quite frankly.
Sure.
And when there are challenges, that kind of motivates you to do certain things, and it motivates you to kind of seek some solutions. And so 7, 8 years ago, in particular, really started working on articulating what I felt was important in business, what I felt was important in banking. And try to put that in writing for the team, and try to put a process in place and a infrastructure in place where that leadership, that philosophy, our core values, our guiding principles
Sure.
are really distributed throughout the organization, not just for me, but for the 30 some odd leaders we have throughout the organization. And so we developed what we call our Thrival philosophy. You've probably heard of that before.
Sure.
I haven't been shy about talking about that at all, about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And it started with a very simple mission statement, started with a very simple list of core values, and it developed into about 15-page vision statement, and people just really yawn when I say that. But it really is a guideline on how we do business and how we behave and how each employee behaves on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
We talk about our 6 core values. We talk about our 4 pillars of customers, employees, community, and shareholders. And we talk about a 3-column model where people are held accountable to not just performance-based issues, meeting goals and objectives, not just technical expertise, but how they behave and how they react with themselves and with one another, which we call awareness of self and others.
Sure.
And so this Thrival philosophy came about with these 6 core values, these 4 pillars, this 3-column model of employee engagement and accountability.
So when you say some of those important things, now I don't want all 15 pages, but can you give us an example of some of those, maybe specific examples of some of those things that you saw were important to the organization, whether it be, is it communication, is it is it lead by example? What were some of those things that you said, we'd really like to nail this down to be able to be a successful organization moving forward? Just maybe 1 or 2 examples of specifics, so someone can maybe grab something and go, yeah, I've never thought of that before. Maybe it's the point of communication needs to be better, or
Right.
timeliness, or like you said, self-awareness. I'd never even really thought of that until you just said that. That's something that is valuable to team members.
Well, and if we just stay on that 3-column model to begin
Sure.
with, what's most difficult about that is adhering to people to all 3, that all 3 matter. So the example I'll use commonly is, Susie might be a great person, and she bakes great cookies, she brings them in every Friday, everybody loves her, everybody loves Susie. But if Susie doesn't have the technical skills, if Susie's not hitting her goals and objectives, she's not performing.
Sure.
Right? On the reverse side, if Bill just cranks it, knows everything technically, is really a go-getter, but leaves scorched earth behind him, and that's really not sustainable either. So you really have to have all three, and it's really difficult to instill a culture where people and leaders hold everyone accountable to that.
Yeah.
So what we spent a lot of time on is leadership development, performance leadership, and what that means. So on an annual basis, everyone is accountable to goal setting and making goals throughout the year.
Yeah.
We don't do annual performance reviews.
Okay.
And the reason we don't do annual performance reviews is we want to have point-in-time feedback, point-in-time goal and objectives feedback, whether you're hitting it or not. So every leader is accountable to having a check-in with their individual employee at least every 2 weeks.
Sure.
So you're talking about here's where you are. Maybe there's a shortfall. Here's what we're observing on your behavior. You got to work on, and you do that as that point in time so that it doesn't get stale.
I was always just kind of confused by the once a year check-in. I
Right.
just feel like that's a very long time that someone could be doing something incorrectly. And you don't want to micromanage, but at the same time, those quarterlies or
Right.
even those weekly team meetings where it's checking in and going, okay, what behavior can we correct? What opportunities do we have?
Right.
I worked at a company to where we got away from the annual just because we went, you can be 11 months into a bad habit before we even
Right.
see anything that, so very cool to have that moving forward. And I want to talk about that a little bit more after this break. We're going to get into, maybe culture, personality, how you motivate team members. Stick around. We'll be right back for more with Doug Chaffin right after this break.
He can see the clock, so it's easier right there.
Yeah, if you put one over here, I don't need the desk. I hate looking over my shoulder at the clock.
Yeah, no, that actually came with this spacious studio room,
Yeah.
which we've outgrown, but it really does. Our business is time
Absolutely.
and connecting. So everyone has a different connection, goal, and we
30
got him.
seconds.
He's learning.
That's good.
You're
He's a-
learning.
Learning. Yeah.
Learning something every day.
Aren't we all learning all the time
I
until
love
we die?
it. Well,
That's kind of life.
it's very
That's the fun
important.
part. That's what keeps it interesting.
I'm learning not to. My
10
next
seconds.
home won't be on Front Street. It isn't on Front. I live at
After
the towns on
5,
Front.
4,
Lots of
3.
construction.
2, 1.
Mm.
You're on.
Welcome back to Business and More. I'm your host, Greg Moore. We have Doug Chaffin, President and CEO of Monroe Bank and Trust, in studio today. And we've been talking a little bit about leadership, culture, how to lead, those type of things in the first quarter. Doug, I did want to get into something with you because you mentioned it right before the break. You were saying how maybe one employee, everyone loves her, but possibly underperforming in some metrics. You have another employee, he's go-getter, but he's leaving scorched earth behind. And I think anyone who's either had coworkers, led a team, owned a business, we've been in those situations where you have those different personality conflicts, or just personalities in general. Because I'm a big believer in that. I love learning about personalities, Myers-Briggs, temperaments, things like that. I feel the better I can work and understand someone, that communication, the better we all are off when leading a team or working together. I had so many people. I was at AT&T for 10 years, account manager towards the end, and I had 180 employees through 18 different stores at one time. And our managers, who were a little bit older than me, we would sit in these managers' meetings, and they would go, "Oh, these millennials. Oh, they don't want to work. They don't," right? And we were very big into generational training, right? We would go through training on how do you, with someone who's a baby boomer versus a Gen X versus a millennial. And it seemed like to me, it was, and I'm not trying to be degrading to those managers, but it was almost like a shortcut just to blame the generation.
Yeah.
And I would sit there and go, well, what are we doing to engage this group of people? Because I'm an elder millennial. I'm right on that edge. I'm 38, so I'm definitely on that. That I could be split between Gen Y and millennial. But when I worked with millennials, and most of my sales force was in that 20 to 28 year range, if I found something that they were passionate about, I didn't have a harder worker than a millennial in my store.
Right.
And this happened multiple times to where sometimes we even have to move them or shift them out of an area. I had a young guy come in, his mom and dad wanted him to have a job while he was in college. We put him on the sales floor, horrible salesman. But all of a sudden I'm noticing he's cutting up YouTube clips and embedding stuff, and he would do little things for the managers meetings. And I went, so is this your thing? Oh, I love doing video stuff. This was before live was even a thing. He was doing, the periscoping and all that stuff. And I went, so I called corporate and I said, maybe take a look at this guy for our graphics department. I don't want him on my sales floor. And lo and behold, a couple months later, he's working at corporate doing that and had a great success. So it was finding that right fit with, recognizing the skill, not only that, but recognizing the personality. And maybe speak to that a little bit. I know you guys have, at Monroe Bank and Trust, you have a wide range of ages, sexes, personalities, backgrounds. And, maybe it's a little harder for you to speak to that when you're at the CEO level, but I know that you're down in the trenches as well, so to speak.
Right.
What's that like a little bit, that dynamic, basically managing or trying to get all those different types of people in the same ship going in the same direction? I mean, do you value culture and personality and communication, all those different things? Do you look at those and study those? How can we do better in any of those areas?
Culture is everything.
Yeah.
So Peter Drucker had a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week.
Oh, I like that.
And 85% of all corporate initiatives fail because of the lack of culture and because of the challenges. When we first started going through our cultural journey about 7 or 8 years ago, I had a department that was underperforming, that wasn't doing well. We hired a consultant, and she came back to give me a report, and I said, just tell me who I need to fire. Just tell me who I need to get rid of. So
Right.
And she looked at me very earnestly and said, you know what? The problem, honestly, isn't this department. The problem is the culture within the organization. And so,
Wow.
so she said, I'd really like to have permission to talk to your senior leadership, maybe your executive leadership, and really get a sense of it. And I said, well, if you want to talk to our upper echelon, why don't you just start with me?
Right.
And so we did. We actually started with that. So that was really the beginning of this cultural journey. Getting to millennials, they have taught us a lot, quite frankly. And yes, it's a frustrating group. We've had training sessions where they start looking at their wives and say, you know what, I got stuff to do. Do I have to stay here all day long? So there's that kind of a thing that we have to train them on. But what millennials have taught us is they want to be part of something meaningful.
Yes.
They want to understand what the purpose of the organization is. They want to understand, why am I here and what am I trying to accomplish? Everyone wants to understand that.
That's true, yeah.
We grew up in a management environment as baby boomers that was carry-offs from the military days, right?
Yeah.
It was command and control. It was, you do this, shut up, do it, otherwise people die,
Yeah.
right? And so we lived that legacy from World War II, we lived that legacy from other conflicts. Today, and if you continue the analogy, the military operates much differently. People are trained to think for themselves. People are trained to react and respond on the
Yeah.
field. We have
That's
to
good.
do the same thing, and understanding what the overall purpose is, without a doubt, understanding what the overall objective is all of it, without a doubt.
Sure.
But it's that purposeful, meaningful, approach
Sure.
toward the culture and toward what you're trying to accomplish that applies to everyone.
So what were some of the culture changes that or some of the things that they instituted to change a culture? And the only reason I'd just like to dig in a little bit, because that's a pretty broad term, changing
Right.
the culture. Okay,
Right.
well, we have someone out there listening who goes, I got 18 employees, I want to change the culture. What are you talking about? Do I talk nicer? Do I make them show up 10 minutes early?
Right.
Do I, you know what I mean? So what were some things maybe that they looked at and that you're comfortable talking about within the organization where they said, we could tweak a few of these things? Because it's not like, let's set the right tone here. It's not like Monroe Bank and Trust was burning to the ground. You guys
Right.
were in great shape. You had happy employees. But you being the leader said, I want to take it to the next level, right? I want to make sure
Right.
I'm doing the right thing for the company, for the shareholders, for the employees. and that's where this kind of came about. So what were some of the few
Well,
things they might have said you should tweak?
You start out with just a basic philosophy and an understanding that culture is an ongoing journey.
Okay.
You know, it's not something that you graduate from. It's not something that you do. You go out and hug a tree, you cry, they cry, and everybody's
Lifestyle, yeah.
fighting each other, and it changes the culture. No, that's not what cultural change is about. That might be motivation, that might be inspiration, but it really is a journey that you execute every single day of the week, every day of the year, every year in your career. It is something that you have to instill, support, and continue to reinforce and re-support. So when we started this journey out, 7, 8 years ago, it really started by trying to articulate what our philosophy was, which is how we developed our Thrival philosophy. That was something that I started writing and started getting feedback. Started doing it kind of surreptitiously. I had a draft of our Thrival philosophy. I'd lay it on a table after a meeting with confidential, do not read, scribbles on it, and just leave it behind. And I would have employees come to me and say, Doug, I'm not sure you were supposed to leave this back. And I'd say, well, did you read it? Well, yeah. Well, okay, well, what do you think? And they give me feedback. And so I got feedback from our senior staff, I got feedback from our executive staff. That journey had to start with me. It had to continue with our executive team. It had to continue with what we call our senior group, our top 30 people. It had to continue with every one of our 110 officers, and it had to continue with every employee. So it was a long time journey. Part of the foundational support with that was trying to understand how people think.
Okay.
And how people process information, more importantly. You mentioned Myers-Briggs. There's Myers-Briggs, there's DISC, there's a lot of those psychologically based processes that are in place. We use a process that was it's sociologically based. It's called IOPT.
Okay.
You can Google it. You can look it up. It's not well known because it isn't used in the same way. But it is about how people think in certain situations and how people think in a certain environment. So most of our most of the public are relatively conservative. Most in terms of their thinking.
Sure.
Most of the people think in terms of a linear process. Most people think in terms of needing to understand the process, if you will. So clear and reasoned understanding, as we call it. Others are much more creative. Others, are kind of free flowing. Others have need for forward improvement. So you really talk about, all right, and try to identify how people are processing information, not because it's a part of a selection process, if you will, or part of a promotion process. It's how do teams work within a team, and how do individuals work within a team, and then how do teams work among themselves. And so understanding how people process information was a really key element, a really key
That's very interesting, because it's almost, you weren't exploring business strategies, but you were exploring how to understand people,
right,
your workforce, which is such a shift, like you said, from corporate America. I mean, it was, when you were saying from the military, I think of my stepfather, who was at a stamping plant for 38 years.
Right.
I mean, it was military. It was, you showed up at this time, you put in your hours, you got your money, and it was just this mentality that he had of like, no, you not only company loyalty, but you stay there, you do what you're told, you get your paycheck, which is a big shift from how we approach workers now. But I think it's a pretty novel idea to say, we're not going to figure out how to, necessarily have some type of specific business strategy, but understand the person, psychologically, sociologically, like you said. Not a whole lot of businesses, I would say, in this region or even at that employee level are really doing that. Which I think can be harmful sometimes, because we have to shift. We have new generations of workers coming. We have to shift with those times. As a business owner, or as, like I said, influencer in a business.
right.
So you saying that you're actually trying to understand the way the person thinks, I think that's a huge nugget to take away from that.
And the purpose behind that is really not to be I don't know how to place that. be overly forgiving.
Right.
It's really to understand how to communicate to
Right.
that particular individual. How do you communicate to a team, understanding what the team dynamics are? We've got example after example after example where we're trying to convince an employee that a certain path is the right direction to go.
Yeah.
And they're just not getting it. And no matter what kind of coaching we do, they're just not getting it. So we'll sit back and we'll look. Okay, what's their IOP profile? Okay, I'll use terms that people
Sure.
want to understand. But hey, they're an LPHA. Okay,
Yeah.
Bill needs complete and reasoned understanding. Let's make sure he understands the purpose behind what we're trying to do. Make sure he understands what the consequences are if he doesn't do that.
Sure.
Make sure he understands all those details. So and it's just like a light bulb. Goes
Yeah.
off. So
No, I use that young in my sales career, in my early 20s. I would, when I would greet someone, I would tell them a quick joke, a dumb dad joke, as you would call it now.
Yeah.
And the way they responded to that joke, I already had them pegged in one of 4 temperaments. And I went, okay, so this person's either sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, melancholy. I got one of those. I can build off of that now. Now I know how to respond, what's going to be important to them. Now, obviously, we're asking questions and digging down deeper into their needs and things like that, building value, all those things that you hear about in sales. But it was very beneficial to me to understand that there's basically 16 personalities, 4 temperaments. Obviously, people offshoot from that. You have experiences and nurture versus nature and all those things that happen along the way. But we're basically who we are by the time the concrete is set in the form by the time we're 13, 14, most people think. And so you have these basic personality types to where, and I do the same with my kids. I mean, they have love languages. One, I show them love by giving them gifts. The other one's quality time. The other one's physical touch. If I did any of those 3 different with my 3 kids, it's just, they don't connect the same way. I feel employees and people you work with and network with are kind of the same way. You need to get on that same level to where you're, like you said, clearly communicating, because then we can move forward. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the BDC, because that's a board you and I both serve on together.
Great.
And I want to talk about how that's affecting Monroe County business in general. Just a few minutes, we'll be back with Doug Chaffin on Business and More. No, that's good stuff.
yeah.
It's that stuff is so interesting to me. I think in another life I should have been a psychologist, because it's just so.
Fascinating.
It's almost like you can tell the future a little bit. You read this and go this, and we almost. I used to be a big nurture guy versus nature, right? Like,
Right.
no, it's the environment. And then you get into it and you go, I think it's like, and now we're trying, a lot of geneticists and stuff are shifting more towards the DNA part of it. I think you have a DNA gene, and that's what your propensity is to, and then nature can affect it a little bit. But the older I get and the more people I interact with, they just kind of put themselves into these limited boxes. We're all kind of the same, but different, but
One of the
You know what I mean?
nuances we've discovered is that under stress and under a different environment, people do process things a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the core is still there and the basics are still there. But, as an example, back in 2015, when we had an efficiency initiative, my profile changed because I had need for forward movement. I wanted to get things done. So, we actually have these little we call them a tent that indicates what your profile is, and every employee has one.
okay.
And my tent became a little oblong, it became a
Right.
little pointed during that period of time that, okay, I need to see certain things done in a certain time frame. So it just kind of illustrates how environment does matter. It's not everything, but
Sure.
it does matter.
Yeah.
No, it does.
Yeah.
My philosophy from a year ago has changed significantly.
Sure,
And,
you learn things.
well, and we've hired 3 new people.
See, there you go.
10 seconds.
Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're on.
Welcome back to Business and More. I'm your host, Greg Moore. Today in studio we have President and CEO of Monroe Bank and Trust, Doug Chaffin. We've been talking for the first half of the show extensively about communication, influencing the people you work with, and just how you can lead a team. And I think it's been very beneficial. Doug, I did want to shift gears here after this break and talk a little bit about the BDC. That's the Business Development Corp. You and I both serve on that board. Can you give me a little history of how you became involved with that board and what your role is on it?
Well, the Monroe County BDC was founded as Monroe County Industrial Development Corp. Back in 1980, I think, is 80
Oh, wow.
or 82, so it's been around for a long time. And Monroe Bank and Trust and the leadership of Monroe Bank and Trust was one of the founders of that organization. It's a not-for-profit, non-public organization.
Okay.
And we've always had leadership engaged and involved. And so that was the first organization when I came to town that Ron LeBeau said, hey, you need to look at this and join the board. And I've been chairman of the board for several years.
Okay.
And so it's been an integral part of how the community gets things done from an economic development perspective.
Sure.
There are two economic development organizations in Monroe County. There's the Monroe County EDC, Economic Development Corp., which is coordinated by county government, and as you very well know, and county supported. And that group tends to deal more with policy, more with infrastructure, more with those
Sure.
kinds of broader things. The BDC really gets involved with recruitment and retention, and the reason that's important from a public perspective and from an independence perspective is that you deal with businesses every single day, Tim Lake and others at the
Sure.
BDC, and a lot of the information you're dealing with is very confidential, and people aren't going to be willing to talk to you if they think those conversations are going to
Right.
become public. And so because it's a private organization, our minutes are not FOIA-able,
Sure.
if you will. And so that's
I think that's a word.
That's
Yeah.
a real critical component of that. So
Yeah.
the BDC and the EDC actually work in tandem with one another.
Sure.
And,
Complement each other nicely, I'd say, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what would be the benefit if I have a small to medium to even large size business and I'm thinking about coming to Monroe County, and someone tells me, oh, you need to go talk to maybe Tim Lake or Doug Chaffin or someone at the BDC. What would be that benefit? Is there a planning aspect from it that the BDC handles? Is it just strategic? Maybe talk about that a little bit for anyone out there
Right.
listening that might go, well, how does that benefit me, or is that just a general benefit of being a business owner in Monroe County?
Well, what the BDC and the EDC developed many years ago is something called the Streamlining Guide, Monroe County Streamlining Guide. And it's a guideline that helps municipalities, utilities, other service providers to, on a coordinated effort, work with existing businesses and work with growing businesses or businesses that are moving into the community on developing their operation further. And so the Streamlining Guide is a real important part of that the BDC helps to coordinate.
Sure.
So what Tim Lake can do is provide some ideas in terms of available property for expansion.
Okay.
He can provide some ideas on where to go to get things approved by a municipality if you need to have a permit approved, where to go to and who to talk to with a utility to get enough power or enough gas or whatever it is that you need to support it. So it's really a coordinating arm with all of that.
Sure.
It's also an educational group. So twice a year we hold educational programming for our stakeholders about what's happening in the community, what's happening in our local economy.
Sure. I think we have one coming up, don't we? Yeah.
We do have one
Very
coming
soon.
up, in a couple of weeks. I
Yeah, a
think.
couple weeks, yeah.
And so
Which
that's-
are always well attended.
They are.
Very-
We'll
very
get 100
popular.
people to that probably. It's a stakeholders meeting that everyone will participate in. And I think the overriding purpose of the BDC is really help economic development overall. Back about, 5-6 years ago, with Monroe County government and coordinated with the BDC, we developed what's called the Monroe County Link Plan, which
Yep.
you've seen, and as part of that, we've talked about that in other venues in the past. And the Monroe County Link Plan was, number one, acknowledging that we've got a great opportunity with the Gordie Howe International Bridge Crossing that's gonna be completed in a few years.
Yeah.
And what that might do to our local economy here in Monroe County. So we started with a study of the I-75 corridor, identified and talked to those 7 municipalities that line that corridor. What property is available for development, what property shouldn't be available for
Yeah,
development,
sure,
which is part of it. And then what infrastructure is needed and what are those opportunities. And from that came these 6 pillars as you've if she's noted in the past.
Sure.
That each pillar has a captain that's in charge of a certain component of that plan, and we're in the process of executing that plan, so we'll be ready in 2024, whenever
Yeah.
that occurs. So.
It's always, I always chuckle a little bit because, for the average resident or citizen, they have lives, they're going to work, they're raising families, they're doing all these things. And I always chuckle when it's like, it's like 8 to 10 years worth of planning, and what you get in return is just someone driving down, oh, look that's different.
Oh, right,
You're like,
right.
oh, that was 12 years and
Right.
300 people worth of getting that corridor established, or so economic development is one of those things where you're not going to possibly see returns right away. It's kind of that slow growth,
Right.
but it is very rewarding. And on the BDC side of it, you talked about Tim Lake. I had experience with him where I brought in a business owner who was wanting to purchase some property, and Tim and Matt met me, and it was, we got the stats for this, and the traffic counts, and the demographics, and we'll call Tamacog for the grant that we could possibly do. And I'm going, hey, Tim, I'm a broker. Leave me a little room here. He's not going to want to pay me. Geez, you're doing my job for me, jokingly.
Right.
But it was just one of those things where in Monroe County we have this group that can really nurture someone new coming into the community and going, from A to Z, essentially, what do you need? We want to help you thrive and plant here and grow here, and have employees here, which I just thought was, I think this was before I was on the board. This was 3 or 4 years ago. So it was like one of these eye openers where I always try to give that some exposure, because a lot of people don't even know that it's going on. They just see 3 letters, or maybe they hear about it once a year in the paper, and they don't know. There's some dedicated people in Monroe doing a lot of work to try to make this a better place to work and live and play.
Yeah, a good example of how that Monroe County League plan is really being executed. There is a group that Mike Masonic leads called Image and Branding for Monroe County. And since they recognized early on that since over 50% of our workforce leaves Monroe County for their daily job, they go to through our exits and entrances along I-75 every day. And so
it's 70% for me in Bedford.
well,
We're all
okay,
going
there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we have our own image of ourselves sometimes based upon what they see in those exits.
Yeah.
So that this isn't the only thing they're working on, but that particular group, Image and Branding, has worked on, why don't we clean up these exit ramps? Why don't we clean up the appearance of that?
Yep.
So they started asking the Monroe County Road Commission to start mowing it, and started working with the corrections group in Monroe County to help maintain those entrance and exits, and it's made a great impact. People have actually noticed that.
You say that, but when I took the family on a vacation out to the Ozarks in Arkansas, and some of the places we saw on the way back, we went, okay, note that for next year, just based on us driving through the highway, the
Right.
expressway or the highway we were on, and seeing the exits. Went, oh, this looks interesting. And all I'm seeing is 800 feet on either side, but it made an impression. I'm driving through, I got 17 hours with 3 kids to make it back to Monroe, but I went, oh yeah, write this down, Fayetteville, stuff like that, to where it makes such an impression when you're driving down that corridor.
Sometimes just mowing the grass makes a difference. So it's
No,
good.
that is true. And then with the BDC too is, we had Tim the whole way with the Lewis corridor. It's going before the local board to hopefully establish a corridor down there. So, and I know
Right.
Monroe Bank and Trust has some property right there. You're the cornerstone. We actually just got done with our TAP grant where we put in our 4 other corners to mirror yours. You guys were ahead of your time there, made that corner look nice. So he was there with that. We getting the grant money, and finding the mapping and the attorneys and the laws and all that. So I always do like to give BDC a little bit of exposure, and EDC as well too. I sit on that board as well, and I know you work closely with it. Those two, the public and the private, working together like that to make sure we have economic growth in the community is just so important. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get into the last quarter of our show. Just flies by when you're talking to someone like Doug, who knows how to hold a conversation, so informational. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. More with me, your host, Greg Moore, and Doug Chaffin. Probably for the last part, you care if we get into the little bit of the what's going on with First Merchants and all that? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Or is there anything you want to talk about in the last quarter? Got anything you want to bring up?
One of the speaking points you mentioned, bullet point, was entrepreneurship. If you
Yeah, let's
wanna
get into
hit
that a
on
little bit.
that, yeah, if you just want to ask,
Okay.
hey,
There
what's
aren't
important?
enough.
I want everybody to read this book.
What
I want
is it?
everybody to Start with Why by Simon Sinek.
Oh,
It's a
cool.
phenomenal. I'm going to give you this copy, Greg. It's.
You want to what?
I'm going to give you this copy.
I saw a quote that said, "Oh, now on the slide." I am a Y person though, and it drives my wife
Right.
nuts. Drives my friends nuts. I got a friend that will just give me an answer to shut me up. You know what I mean? One of those.
Right.
He's a real good friend, 25 plus years. So why do you think? Well, Dry. Why do you think this? I don't know, Greg. Because you know what I mean. And I just I've always said it. If you know, I don't care where you go to school or what kind of education you have. I just want my kids to be curious, and I want them to have good work ethic. If they're always asking why and they have a good work ethic, I think they're going to do okay in life.
Right.
You know what I mean?
What is the last name of that author?
Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. Simon
Okay.
Sinek. He does a lot of TED Talks too. So if you
Okay.
if you see any of his TED Talks, they're
I might have seen one of his TED Talks
You
because the
probably
name
seen
sounds
10
familiar.
seconds.
Okay.
I just found out a new site.
Four,
It's called The
three,
Hustle.
2, 1.
It's interesting.
You're on.
Welcome back to Business and More. I'm your host, Greg Moore. We're in studio today with Doug Chaffin. Doug, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you,
It's
Greg.
been absolutely amazing. You know, for the last part of the show, I did want to touch on entrepreneurship a little bit. I do have a lot of young business owners and entrepreneurs. Seems to be the buzzword the last maybe 15, 20 years, you know, especially the younger generation. Well, I'm an entrepreneur. Well, what exactly does that mean? You know, how are you applying that? I feel like sometimes we use that term, but there's a lot of work that goes with that term just besides, I own my own business or I have an idea that I'm trying to see to fruition. Can you speak to that a little bit? Maybe the definition or what you feel an entrepreneur is and what that entails.
Well, it entails a lot of things, obviously, and I think something that's important. This really gets back to kind of what the lessons that we learned from millennials is understanding what you're trying to accomplish and understanding what your purpose is a real critical component of being a successful entrepreneur. There's a book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why.
Start with why. Okay.
Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. Great author. He's been around for a while. And he gives very good examples of entrepreneurs that failed and entrepreneurs that were very successful. And one of the best examples is the Wright brothers and
Sure.
you know, creating and inventing flight. There was a race at that period of time in our history to have manned flight,
Sure.
being active and being successful. And there was a gentleman by the name of Langley who was extremely outgoing. He was extremely well funded. He had government funding to create flight, and spent thousands of dollars. Had all these press releases and such. His goal was to be rich and famous. The Wright brothers, by contrast, sold their bicycle shop to fund their goal to fly.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it sounds very simple, sounds very, very straightforward, but they didn't go out to be rich and famous.
Sure.
They knew what their purpose was. They understood what they were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real key component for any successful entrepreneur or any successful business leader.
Sure.
You know, understand why. Understand
Understand
what you're
why,
trying
yeah.
to accomplish. What's your purpose?
And where the passion's coming from. If
Exactly.
the passion is to become rich and famous, you might.
Yeah.
You might want, you very well could. But sometimes I think that's secondary. I think if you're passionate about something and you're finding something in a niche market, you're providing something in a free market system, I think in this country, I think you should be pretty good on your way to being out of poverty and into some type of success. You know.
Being rich and famous is a result of all that
Right.
hard work, right? It's
Probably
really,
distraction too.
exactly.
You know, if you're really trying to accomplish some things. I have a gentleman that I have mentioned on this show before too, but he stuck out to me. I found him in 2004 on Wine Library TV. Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a young guy. He took his dad's business from about $1 million. His dad's a Russian immigrant. Started mopping floors in a liquor store. Saved up enough money to then buy the liquor store when the gentleman retired. Brought his son up selling fine spirits. This guy wanted to be a wine taster, a som, and took his dad's business over at 18, took it from 1 million to about 16 million in 3 years. Was the first person ever to do a live streaming on the internet in 2004. And now he's kind of a social media marketer and things like that. But he's just very blunt. He uses some 4-letter words that I wish he wouldn't in a corporate setting because I can't share the video. but he's well-meaning, and he's very blunt, and he just says things like, he has people come to him all the time like, oh, I just need a $150,000 angel investor for this idea I have, and he goes, look, are you passionate about? Oh, it's all I want to do. He's like, great. Work your 9 to 5. Human only needs 4 hours sleep a night. Work 9 to 5, 5 to 2 a.m. You work on your passion, sleep 4 hours, save up your money. You'll have $150,000 in no time, 18 months. Go do it. And they just turn away and kind of are dumb. Well, no, don't you have someone that can give me, and he goes, no, where's your passion? Is it, if you're an entrepreneur, are you truly passionate about it? Then you will do whatever it takes to get to that next level, and sometimes I feel like I said, the E word is thrown around, and it's like, are you really passionate about it? Are you going to make sacrifices?
There are no shortcuts.
There's no shortcuts to hard work, right?
No.
Yeah. Well, Doug, I wanted to touch on this before we finish up here. We have a few minutes left in the show. I do know that most people in Monroe County probably know this, but for those that aren't listening, Monroe Bank and Trust went through what's the technical term? Is it a merger, buyout? Right?
Merger. Yeah,
merger.
We use the term merger. We officially merged with First Merchants
With
Bank
First
on
Merchants.
September the 1st.
Yeah, so how's that going? Because that's relatively new. That's just finalized just a little over a month ago, or less than a little over a month ago. So how's it? Give us an update on that for those listening in Monroe County.
It's going really well. We are in the process of what's referred to as integration. So we have a systems integration where we transition our systems into the First Merchant systems. We are going through various mock internal exercises to make sure it's clean and seamless and effective as best we can. This weekend, as it happens to be, is Mach 2.
Okay.
To use that technical term, and we will be officially flipping the switch on November the 9th.
November 9th,
on that
okay.
systems integration. So this week, our customers and clients have received their welcome packets, which is intended to make sure they understand what all the logistics of all that. Yeah, exactly, and all of the services that we provide and all the products that we provide, how those are mapping over, and more importantly, the need to make sure that we are current on all their information. So that makes things so much easier when we got the right address, we got the right phone
Sure.
number, we got the right email address. So please, when you get that packet, open it up and just
Right.
fill it out and just hand it over to your friendly a local teller. But that process has been going extremely well. One of the things that we were very mindful about when our board went through this process of trying to determine whether it's time to seek a strategic partner, is we wanted to make sure it was the right organization. We wanted to make sure that being mindful of our shareholders,
Sure.
we also want to be mindful of our community, of our employees, of our customers. And this is really the right partner at the right time.
And I think I met some of the leadership team at an economic update at Monroe Bank and Trust that hosted it, and they just seemed like great people.
They are great folks.
Yeah.
Mike Brecken and I, Mike's the CEO at First Merchants, we kind of co-hosted that particular event. We had 150 people there, which was great, and the two of us kind of stood side by side and really talked about this combination of two very successful companies, and it's been a very gratifying process.
So let me ask you this: what does that mean for? I'm going to ask you two questions. What does it mean for the average customer? Is it a benefit that this has taken place? Do they have any additional services or additional benefits for being a part of the First Merchants family?
Yeah, there are. First Merchants is, to start with, a $10 billion company. With our addition, it's about a $12 billion company.
Okay.
So with that scale, provides the ability to do more. And so lending capacity is much higher. Areas such as mortgage lending, which we did a pretty good job of.
Sure.
We've got more products and services in mortgage lending today than we did in the past. And it's a little more competitive from a pricing standpoint than it was in the past. So that's all good. As our customers have grown, as our business customers have grown, we start bumping up in our own lending capacity. Now that's up by 5 times of what it used to be. So that's always a good benefit. And then really from a technical standpoint, with the technology changes
Sure.
day in, day out, doing online and digital processing of a lot of services and products, it's much more expanded under the First Merchants world as well.
So it's a little self-serving for me as someone who does commercial real estate as well, residential and commercial real estate. You're saying some of those options maybe for someone in my industry could get a little better too, the lending capacity, things like that?
Absolutely.
All right.
In fact, we have a very good client who has a very successful business and headquartered in downtown Detroit today. We were, because of all the development that's taking place in Detroit, they do a lot of work for Dan Gilbert's organization.
Sure.
And, and Bedrock and that group. We're at their capacity. Well, they're looking at a $30 million project today that now we're able to bid on that. We're able to get involved in that.
Absolutely.
So it's that capacity helps a great deal. But it's not just the only thing. It's just every other thing that we're trying to take advantage of. Whether it is in our private wealth group, which we had a pretty good, a very successful wealth planning and advisory group. We're bringing more to the table for our clients who are investing their own wealth today.
Sure.
Bringing more to the table for our retail customers in terms of access to services in the digital age. Bringing more to the table on our commercial clients, not just from a lending standpoint, but from a treasury management standpoint as well.
So, with just a few minutes left in the show, with 40 years of banking experience, I'd be remiss not to ask you this. This is kind of a fun question for me. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, and it's going to be very general, but I'd love to hear anyone who's been in a profession for X amount of years like that. Where do you see the banking industry in 10, 20, 30 years? If you're looking down the corridor and you're going, if I can make some best estimates here, where do you see it going? Because now you got 40 years of it underneath your belt.
Right.
Where do you see it going? Or, is
It's,
technology going to play a role? Is it going to get back to more personal? Are we going to see it more automated? Does cryptocurrency have anything to do with it? What?
all of the above. How long from now? 40 years from now? Is that what
I
you're
don't know,
saying?
10, 20,
Yeah,
you pick the time
you know,
scale. Where do you see it in the near future?
What I know is it's going to be different.
Okay, yeah.
It's going to be different, and we're going to be challenged. I think every business is challenged with this today, of how do you adapt to the changes in the environment? Because what's happening throughout banking and throughout business is technology changes, our competitive environment is changing, as new competitors enter into the world. Microsoft is in banking now.
Right.
That for all practical
Heck,
purposes.
Apple's in banking. Apple's in credit cards now, right?
Absolutely. Kmart's Target is in banking. So that competitive environment has changed, and as a result of that, customer expectations and behaviors have changed, and continue to change. So we will continue to have brick and mortar facilities for the foreseeable future.
Sure.
Those will look different over time, right? And how we apply and how we deploy those retail-based products and services are going to look different. The digital age is with us forever, and technology is with us forever. That will continue to look different. There will be biometrics that are going to be involved in banking in every business at some point in time, and we'll just have to adapt to all of that.
Yeah. Well, Doug, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It was absolutely everything I wanted it to be. It was informational, a lot of good stuff for the people listening. Could you give a shout out on that book, the name and the author, one more time for anyone watching or listening here on Monroe County Radio?
Yeah, the title is Start With Why, W-H-Y.
Okay.
And the author is Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K.
Okay.
And if you Google him, he does a lot of TED Talks as an example. There's a lot of YouTubes with Simon Sinek. Good stuff.
Cool. Well, once again, thank you, Doug, for being in studio today. I appreciate it. The hour just flew by. Thank you for all those that were listening. Hopefully you got something out of it. And I will see you back here next month on Business and More. I'm your host, Greg Moore. Have a good day, guys. Good? Thanks again,
It was a
Doug.
lot of fun, Greg.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Here is your t-shirt, I think.